I want to let you in on a little secret. When I'm not traveling to Las Vegas, or podcasting about Las Vegas, or watching movies about Las Vegas, I like to read about Las Vegas. And over the last several years of doing this podcast, I've been fortunate enough to talk to some very cool authors who've written amazing books about the city, including its people and its history. I thought it might be fun to take a little trip down memory lane and reshare some of those conversations with you. Maybe even give you some ideas for titles to add to your own personal Las Vegas library. My name is Jeff, the host of Jeff Does Vegas, and this is a little something I like to call Vegas Book Club. For this installment of Vegas Book Club, we're heading back to episode number 42 of the podcast and my interview with Richard Zoglin, the author of Elvis in Vegas, How the King Reinvented the Las Vegas Show. July 31st, 1969 was a day that changed Las Vegas forever. That was the day that the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, stepped onto the stage at the newly opened International Hotel to kick off what would eventually turn into one of the biggest Las Vegas residencies of all time. Richard and I dove deep into Elvis's first appearance in Vegas back in 1956, the unlikely friendships he made during his time in Las Vegas, the toll that his residency took on his health, and the impact that Elvis made on Las Vegas, from the doors he opened for future entertainers to the presence he still maintains in the city today. Please enjoy my conversation with Richard Zoglin.
I think, people have sort of noted before that Elvis made his big comeback in Las Vegas. Vegas is what revitalized his career, and people have looked at Elvis's Vegas years before, but nobody has really looked at what Elvis did for Vegas. The whole history of Vegas entertainment has not really been done before. I think I have done the first really comprehensive look at the evolution of the Vegas show. And I think Elvis is a major turning point in the Las Vegas show. I think he changed Vegas entertainment. Before Elvis, it was mostly sort of intimate nightclub kind of shows, the sort of thing that Sinatra and the Rat Pack did. And Elvis brought the first, he was in a new showroom twice as big as any other showroom in Las Vegas. It wasn't really an intimate nightclub show. It was a big rock concert-like extravaganza. And that kind of opened the door to a new kind of Vegas show, those big productions, later Cher and Dolly Parton and Celine Dion. So I think it was that was a real turning point for Vegas, and I think I wanted people to recognize how important Elvis was for Las Vegas.
I've watched some of your other interviews and read some of the other interviews you've done about the book. And you had mentioned in these other interviews that you didn't really set out initially to write an Elvis book, did you?
Yeah, no, that's right. My initial idea was to write a kind of history of the golden age of Vegas entertainment, but focusing on the 60s, from the Rat Pack to Elvis. The Rat Pack show was in 1960, and Elvis, of course, was 69. Perfectly brackets the decade, and that was, I think, the real heyday years of the Vegas show. But I kind of, as I went along, I discovered that Elvis had all these connections with Vegas that I didn't really know about. I didn't realize that he first played Vegas in 1956. He didn't do very well. He was first coming up. He was a young rock and roller from Memphis, and the Vegas nightclub crowd didn't know what to make of him. But then Elvis, really loved Vegas, and he came back. There was his favorite getaway. He would go there after movie shoots. He, of course, made Viva Las Vegas there, which became the iconic Vegas film. He married Priscilla there at the Aladdin Hotel in 1967. And so when it came time for his big comeback to live performing after almost an entire decade of not doing any live stage performing, Vegas was kind of a natural place for him, even though it was kind of surprising to people who had been following Elvis that he would choose Las Vegas. But he had a real connection with Las Vegas.
Some of my favorite stories in the book are in regards to Elvis's connection with Las Vegas as well, and some of the unexpected friendships that he made when he was in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm. I think, the main one that you're probably getting toward is in 1956, when he wasn't doing very well in Las Vegas. Liberace was a big Vegas star at the time. Colonel Parker went over to the Riviera Hotel where Liberace was playing and said, my boy Elvis isn't doing so well. It would really help if you came over and helped him out a little. Saw his show, take some publicity shots with him, which Liberace did. Liberace was a very generous performer. And he gave Elvis one piece of advice. He said, I think your show needs more glitz. Well, Elvis was affected by that. And you can see Elvis really admired Liberace as a showman. And pretty soon he was wearing gold lame suits, the kind that Liberace was wearing in Vegas. And of course, in later years, those flamboyant white jumpsuits. I think that you can see Liberace's influence on Elvis. And the two were friendly. They were friendly throughout their career. So that is an unexpected sort of connection that Elvis has to Las Vegas.
And I loved how Elvis just seemed to randomly pop up in places in Vegas, too. One of my other favorite stories in there was him showing up at Righteous Brothers shows.
Yeah, well, that was after he made his big comeback show. And he still loved going to shows. He would come to Vegas and just go see lounge shows. He liked seeing performers that he admired and was just a big fan of the Vegas show. Well, when he was appearing in the main room at the International Hotel, the Righteous Brothers were in the lounge doing their show. Elvis would walk by, and a couple of nights he went on stage just unannounced and joined Bill Medley on stage. And obviously that was a big deal for fans. The minute word got around that Elvis was walking in on the Righteous Brothers show, suddenly the Righteous Brothers shows were sold out.
My favorite part of that story was Bill Medley's reaction down the road. I don't know who that guy is, but he's really starting to piss me off.
Yeah. The second night that Elvis came in, that was his line. It was very funny.
That just cracked me right up. Elvis's first appearance, we talked briefly about it, 1956. Those shows, they did not do well. Why do you think that was? Was it just a case of Vegas wasn't ready for Elvis, or Elvis wasn't ready for Vegas, a combination of the two? What do you think that was?
This was 56 when rock and roll was still very new and was considered teenage music. And then, in Vegas, you had a crowd of gamblers, mostly middle-aged nightclub goers, and this kid shaking his hips on stage. And this was before he even did the Ed Sullivan Show. So he was starting to get attention. He had a hit song, Heartbreak Hotel, but he had not, kind of gotten the cultural visibility that he would have just a few months later. So this was something brand new for Las Vegas, and it just wasn't in the genre of traditional nightclub entertainment. So, they just didn't know what to make of him, and the reviews weren't even that good.
No, that was really the interesting part, is people just really, they kind of crapped all over him, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, this was something new. I mean, imagine if you remember or, read about back then, Elvis was causing almost riots, in live performing around the country, around the South. And when he went on TV and shaking his hips, it was considered salacious and a bad thing for teenagers to watch. And when he went on Ed Sullivan, they shot him only from the waist up. So in Las Vegas, even though Las Vegas was a little, a hipper town, I mean, people knew what was going on. And but still, a young rock and roller like that was something new and not, just not part of the tradition, the nightclub tradition.
And the Rat Pack members, particularly Frank Sinatra, they were not big fans of Elvis.
Yeah. Frank Sinatra in the 50s, when rock and roll came up, they started to threaten. Frank Sinatra was the hot young singer back in the 40s and early 50s. And now here this whole rock and roll revolution. And Sinatra wrote a famous article for a French magazine where he really badmouthed rock and roll, not Elvis specifically, but rock and roll, which he thought was just bad for kids and bad music. And Elvis did take it personally. And I think Frank kind of came around when Elvis came back from the Army in 1960 after 2 years away. His comeback was, of course, a big deal, his return from the Army. And sure enough, it was Frank Sinatra that got him as a guest on his ABC variety show to make his first TV appearance after his stint in the Army. So Sinatra, I think he may not still have been totally sold on rock and roll, but he he knew what drew ratings, and he knew that Elvis would be a big draw, which he was.
Reading about that special that Frank Sinatra put together, though, I found it interesting the way it was sort of billed as an Elvis comeback special, but Frank really still kept the spotlight on himself, didn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah. He had some of the Rat Packers on the show with him, Sammy Davis and Joey Bishop. It was clearly Frank's special. And Elvis actually was only on for about 10 or 12 minutes. But he was the big draw. But I think it was a way for Frank Sinatra to say, just to remind people that I'm the big dog here. This guy might be a little flash in the pan, and I recognize how popular he is, but I'm still the king of show business.
The almost decade that Elvis took between live performances, as you said earlier, he didn't perform was basically 1960 to 69. And then, of course, he had that time away in the Army. Do you think that was his choice, or do you think that a lot of that was Colonel Tom's influence? Because I kind of got the impression from reading that Colonel Tom Parker was very controlling of Elvis. Was that a protection thing, or was that just him being a controlling manager, do you think?
Well, I think he was a controlling manager, but I think it was a show business decision. He felt that rock and roll, that Elvis had to sort of grow out of rock and roll. At that time, people didn't think that rock and roll was really going to last necessarily, or be any more than, music for kids. So the whole idea, and a lot of other rock and rollers thought this too, that, once they grew out of it, or, grew into their late 20s and 30s, they had to sort of change and do something else if they wanted to have a long running career. And so Elvis had already made some movies, and they had made a lot of money. So the Colonel decided that Elvis would just become a movie star. And I think a lot of his motivation was to keep, access to Elvis very limited. So he wanted people to pay to see his movies. He didn't want them to be able to pay to see him on stage live. He would do recordings and he would do movies, and that was it. Now, Elvis went along with it. I think he looked up to the Colonel. The Colonel was, of course, instrumental in his great success in 1955-56 when he became the hottest thing in music and changed the culture. So I think he trusted the Colonel and he went along with it until, later in the 60s, when Elvis's career was on the downswing and the movies weren't doing quite so well anymore, and the songs he was recording were not making the charts, and Elvis was bored to death with those movies, and he knew they weren't very good, and they didn't satisfy his urge to be a real actor. And so he wanted out of it, but the Colonel he kind of went for the easy money, I think, and he kept signing new film contracts until finally, near the end of the 60s, it was clear that even the movies weren't making much money anymore. And so that's when the Colonel decided that at least he would make his comeback to performing on the big NBC comeback special in December 1968. That was the special that brought Elvis back to the attention of the world, the rock world, and everybody else. Did great in the ratings, did great among the critics. And so right after that, that's when the Colonel decided, okay, now's the time to return to live performing, and he made the deal to come back to Las Vegas.
For all of his faults as well, Colonel Tom Parker was really brilliant the way he marketed Elvis. I mean, one of the interesting things I found in the book was when, they said the shows were sold out. And when the show sold out, he put up more marketing material.
Yeah. He first of all, he blanketed Las Vegas with the kind of publicity that no other show had even come close to. I mean, the anticipation for Elvis's big comeback in Las Vegas was so great. He bought up every billboard in town, put Elvis's name on it, taxi cab tops and bus stops, radio ads. And so he really made it an event. They invited all the rock critics and rock reporters from around the country. And so he really made that Vegas show an event like no other Vegas show had ever been. And he changed the way Las Vegas, marketed its shows. After that, other people tried to make their Vegas shows a big event. People like Cher and Dolly Parton. So, anyway, so yeah, Colonel was a great marketer, and he made that Vegas show a big event, and that is what catapulted Elvis back into the conversation as a rock and roll performer.
And he was smart too in that he didn't have Elvis actually open that showroom.
Yeah, when the International Hotel, Kirk Kerkorian was finishing the International Hotel, the biggest hotel in Las Vegas, and he wanted the biggest acts in show business to open the hotel, and they went to Colonel Parker and to see if Elvis would do it, and the Colonel was ready, and they made a deal pretty fast. But Colonel only said he had one problem: he did not want Elvis to open the hotel. The hotel was still being finished. The Colonel was worried that there might be technical glitches. The sound system might not be all ready to go or whatever. And he said, let somebody else open the hotel. Let somebody else be the guinea pig. We'll come in second. And so that's when the International Hotel went to their backup choice, who was Barbra Streisand. And she opened the hotel. It's 4 weeks in July of 1969, followed by Elvis Presley.
And when Elvis hit the International in 69, rock and roll in Vegas really wasn't a thing either. I mean, we talked a little earlier about everybody kind of thinking, rock and roll wasn't going to last and it wasn't a thing. And by the time Elvis was in his 30s when he hit in Vegas in 69, was he 34?
Yeah.
And so really, rock and roll wasn't paying attention to Las Vegas at all. The rock world kind of looked at Vegas as a bit of a joke, didn't they?
Yeah. Vegas was kind of resistant to rock and roll at the beginning. And then as they saw the Beatles come along and the whole rock revolution of the late 60s, I think they wanted rock and roll, and they got some rock acts or at least R&B acts to play the lounges. But the idea of a rock and roll show on the big Vegas stage was kind of unheard of. The big rock groups obviously were not playing Vegas. It was a town for old people, they felt. But Elvis was a kind of a nice way for Vegas to sort of get into the rock world. He was certainly rock and roll. He was the original rock and roller, but he was evolving and maturing into a performer who he wanted to sing to everybody. He was doing the big ballads and the Suspicious Minds, and old songs, old, Tin Pan Alley songs. He was doing, a whole range of stuff. He was doing gospel. He was doing country. So he showed that a lot more could work on the big Vegas stage than the traditional show tunes and the kind of pop songs that the traditionalists, the Sinatras and Tony Bennett's were singing.
4 weeks straight, nonstop, 2 shows a week in that first run. What kind of toll do you think that took on Elvis? I mean, I have friends that work in Vegas that perform, and they're doing 4 shows a week and going crazy. I can't imagine the kind of toll that would take on a performer.
Yeah, 2 shows a night. Nobody does that anymore. 7 nights a week, not a single night off for 4 weeks. He was so energized at the beginning. He loved being back in front of his fans. He was excited. He was energized every night. And I would say for the first year or two, he was still energized. And if you watch those performances, listen to them, watch them in the 1970 concert film, Elvis, That's the Way It Is, you really see what a great performer he was. I think he was, at his peak as a stage performer. But the grind really started to get to him. Just the sort of sameness of coming back to Vegas. He would come back twice a year for 4-week engagements, twice a year. And it was the same thing every time. And he was also touring. So then that was a grind for him. And he just started to burn out. And, of course, started to have his physical problems, weight gain, the drugs, the drug use started to get worse, and the shows got a little more erratic. So, I think you not blame Vegas, but you certainly, that contributed to just sort of his boredom and, just a kind of laziness sort of set in, I think, in his performing.
The interesting thing about it, though, is that even with the health issues starting to come up and the weight gain and the boredom, he still sounded amazing.
Yeah, I've listened to a lot of recordings all the way through the 70s, even, as late as 74, he was still, his voice, when he probably wasn't looking so good. I'm listening to it on, on CDs, but he sounded great. You could say, well, that voice is still terrific. He had such a great voice. It was so strong. And he didn't burn out. The voice just held up for a long time. So I think it was just when you see the energy he had on stage in 69 or 70 and compare it to some of the very late performances where he wasn't moving around very much and he was kind of puffy, it's a little sad. But boy, he could still, he had that voice to the end.
We talked a little bit earlier about the effect that Elvis Presley had on Las Vegas and the world of entertainment. He really did change a lot about Vegas, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he, for one thing, the show brought rock and roll onto the big main Vegas stage. He brought a new kind of audience to Vegas. The people who came to see him in 69 they were from around the country. They were old Elvis fans, housewives had screamed for him when they were teenagers. Sometimes they brought the whole family, and it was a much more middle American crowd. Not the high rollers necessarily that came to see Sinatra and the Rat Pack, not maybe people who had even been to Vegas before. But it was a new crowd, a middle American crowd, and that was the audience that Vegas would kind of eventually discover. Oh, and it took a couple of decades, but when Vegas went through its own reinvention a little later, where it became more of with the theme park hotels and the Cirque du Soleil shows. So it became a much more of a family vacation destination. And I think Elvis kind of opened the door to that change.
And he really opened the door as well to these modern day Vegas residencies as well. We talked a little bit earlier about, Celine Dion and Cher and the Coliseum at Caesars and places like that. None of that would have happened if it wasn't for Elvis.
No, I don't think so. Elvis showed that, a show could be a big spectacle and the star could be the spectacle. And so that's why people like Cher and Dolly Parton came. But then there was, of course, a period when the stars kind of went into eclipse and the production shows took over. The Siegfried and Roy type of magic acts and, of course, all the Cirque du Soleil shows that multiplied along the Strip. So then, however, in the early 2000s, Celine Dion comes along with a residency. She was really the first, and she was a pioneer too. And then you get, over the last few years, a succession of all these sort of rock pop performers, like, from Jennifer Lopez, Elton John, down through now Lady Gaga and Aerosmith. Sting is going to be playing Vegas in the spring. And so I think you're having a little bit of a revival of the big star headliner shows. And I think they all owe a debt to Elvis Presley, who kind of opened the way to those kind of shows.
Do you find the Vegas folks are sort of playing a little fast and loose with the term residency now?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what residency means. Elvis didn't use it, of course. It wasn't a term back then. I think it was Celine Dion. And Celine really did have a residency where she would appear, often. I can't remember exactly what her schedule was, but, several weeks here, she would stop, she would come back a few weeks later. So over the course of the year, she would play a number of weeks at Caesar's Palace. Now, some of the performers are coming much more infrequently. Lady Gaga actually is there quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But some of the others maybe will just be there for maybe a couple of weeks, twice a year, something like that. So I'm not sure if that's a residency or that's just a guest appearance. So yeah, I'm not sure what exactly the definition of a residency is.
Elvis, he's all over Vegas now. You can't go anywhere without seeing something Elvis related. Why do you think that connection between Elvis and Las Vegas has endured? There's really no other performer that has that same connection or same endurance, is there?
I don't know. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that question. He was the biggest Vegas star for a while there in a period when Vegas was kind of starting to wane in importance. He was in the 70s was kind of Vegas's at the point where people thought of Vegas as a little bit kitschy and not hip anymore. But Elvis kept that town going for a lot of years. So I think Vegas owed a lot to him. Then when he that sudden death, the tragic, death of Elvis was so shocking to Vegas. I think they wanted to keep alive the memory of the guy who really saved the town. And so also the fact that he was easy to imitate, put on a black wig and a white jumpsuit and you're Elvis. So, I guess, there was a little bit of kitschy tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, but also the wedding chapels. I mean, people wanted to connect with Elvis. They wanted to connect with that sort of over-the-top showmanship. And so, he just became the iconic Vegas celebrity, and it's there to this day.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about this book. We have just barely scratched the surface on this. The book is called Elvis in Vegas, How the King Reinvented the Las Vegas Show. People need to get their hands on this book and read it. If you're a Vegas fan, if you're an Elvis fan, you're going to absolutely love it. So again, thank you so much, Richard, for taking the time today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.